It is really good to see everyone. Welcome back. We're in our next 44 alumni Zoom. The purpose here is, we always want to find opportunities for you all to connect while we keep you updated and also just take you behind the scenes for the work as we bring the Obama Presidential Center in particular to life. And so this is another opportunity. If you like it, tell your friends. If you don't like it, tell us what you don't like about it so that we can always improve and get better. I'm Mike Strautmanis. I run external affairs at the Obama Foundation. It's good to see everyone. And, I just love this alumni community so much. It's a thrill to be able to work with Natalie and Ashley, Natalie, Ashley, you've gotten to know well, to bring events like this to you. We had a great time with the architects, the lead architects for the Obama Presidential Center last month. Todd Williams and Billy Chen, TWBTA architects. They got into the inside of their, in-depth conversations with President Obama, Mrs. Obama. My colleague Robin Cohen, who's the first employee, the person who really stood up the foundation, joined. I talked a lot about the community engagement that we did, starting off with all the organizing principles and the values that we all learned back starting for some of us in the Senate campaign all the way through the second term of the White House. And so that was great. This one I think is going to be great. In particular, because this is about, and you'll hear about it, a special part of the Presidential Center that will, in some way be the home for our alumni family, a water garden dedicated to the memory of Barack Obama's mother, Ann Dunham. And so it's a special place. And I think you'll feel just how special it is when you hear our artist, our designer, Maya Lin, talk about it. And my colleague, my dear friend, Louise Bernard, who has really helped, craft this narrative, craft this story, and really bring this museum and this experience to life. So it's a special thing. It's a special connection to alumni, and even more special by the fact that alumni have donated dollars to make it happen, and have been the ones who brought the resources to name this after President Obama's mother. So it's very special to him, and I know it'll be special to all of you. And then there's more to come. We're going to talk about the environmental impact of this project with everything that we know about climate change. We want you to come inside, look under the hood to the steps that we've taken to reach the highest standards of sustainability. We're going to go deep into the exhibits in the museum so you'll understand the parts that will actually be telling the story and more. So it's a great presentation. I hope we have time for question and answers. We know and we expect that you all will ask questions rather in the chat through the button and the process that's in your Zoom. Everybody knows how to do this, apparently, except for me. So ask your questions. If we don't get to them, trust me, just like you all know, we have amazing staff people here who will turn those questions around and get you the answers. So yeah, this is the second one. I feel like we're on a roll. So we'll go ahead and get started. I want to introduce to you my colleague, Dr. Louise Bernard. Louise is a colleague, she's a friend. She actually moved to Chicago so that she could become more embedded in the work that we're doing. She's our senior vice president. She's the founding museum director for the Obama Presidential Center. And she joined the foundation back in 2017. And, one of the things that I know you all have experienced is President and Mrs. Obama they attract the most extraordinary people, don't they? And so, Louise is somebody who I don't know if I would ever had the privilege to get to know and work with as well as I have. But it's been really a thrill. And to see her bring this story that means so much to all of us to life is really exciting. So You'll get to hear from Louise now as she will introduce our special guest. And before that, kind of share the story and take us through. Louise?
Hi, Mike. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that introduction. And hello, everyone. It's wonderful to join you today for this wonderful event with Maya Lin. I'll say a little bit about the Obama Presidential Center. I'll introduce Maya, and then we'll turn over to her for a presentation, followed by questions and conversation. So the Obama Presidential Center is situated on 19.3 acres of historic Jackson Park on Chicago's South Side. It will feature a world-class museum, public gathering spaces, a new branch of the Chicago Public Library, an athletic center, and a variety of community spaces, including an inclusively designed version of the White House kitchen garden, a great lawn, and a playground. The museum will highlight individuals, moments, and places, including aspects of Chicago's history that, as we know, shaped President and Mrs. Obama's stories and early lives. These immersive and participatory exhibits will therefore frame the story of President Obama and the administration's work within a larger narrative of American progressive history. This is the idea, as we have been framing it, of on whose shoulders we stand. And we think a lot about the individual and collective action that continues to move the country toward a more perfect union. As we know, such work is always in progress. So in telling this story, we feature the trajectory of Barack Obama's political career. We covered that path from community organizer on the South Side to the Oval Office, while capturing the inspiring energy of that groundbreaking presidential campaign and election in 2008. We tell the stories of the very people, everyday citizens, and Obama alumni alike, who made that history, that watershed history happen. One of the key ideas that frames the Obama Foundation's work is that of investment. We think about investment in resources, in infrastructure, and in people. This is demonstrated by our commitment to building a beautiful campus with an array of amenities, supporting workforce development, and promoting, importantly, values-based leadership. So through the idea of meeting people where they are, we're also moving them from hope to action. And we seek to provide our audiences with the tools necessary to create change in their communities. In other words, to bring change home. In doing this work, we celebrate those who came before us. And we underscore the idea that we're all social actors in the making of history. We lift up a legacy that strives toward a better future. The Obama Presidential Center will also connect its guests to artworks from renowned artists such as the Chicago sculptor Richard Hunt and our guest today, Maya Lin. Art, as we know, is a powerful mechanism through which to discover our common ground, as well as a means to inspire and empower our visitors to be change agents in their communities. So we're building on the legacy of President and Mrs. Obama's commitment to arts education during their time in the White House. And we seek to elevate the arts while bolstering the representation of diverse practitioners. And with that, I am so pleased to introduce and welcome Maya Lin to speak with us today. As you may be aware, Maya is known for her large-scale environmental artworks, her architectural works, and her memorial designs. She is, as noted, one of the commissioned artists for the Obama Presidential Center. Nature and the environment have long been central concerns for Maya. She was thrust into the spotlight when, as a senior at Yale, she submitted the winning design in a national competition for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial to be built in Washington, D.C. That memorial, which at the time was such a radical departure from the monumental culture that undergirds the very idea of commemoration, has since become an icon. It is much lauded for its abstract beauty, for its emotional acuity, and for its modern yet timeless sensibility. Similarly, Maya Lin's art explores how we experience and relate to landscape, setting up a systematic ordering of the land that is tied to history, memory, time, and language. Her interest in landscape has led to works influenced by topographies and geographic phenomena. Her artwork has been featured in numerous solo exhibitions at museums and galleries worldwide, with works in the permanent collections of the National Gallery of Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Museum of Modern Art, the Smithsonian Institution, among many, many others. Maya has been profiled in Time magazine, the New York Times magazine, the New Yorker, among many other media outlets. In 1996, the documentary about her, Maya Lin, A Strong, Clear Vision, won the Academy Award for Best Documentary. In 2009, she was awarded the National Medal of Arts, the nation's highest honor for artistic excellence. And in 2016, President Barack Obama awarded her the Presidential Medal of Freedom, which is the nation's highest civilian honor, praising her for a celebrated career in both art and architecture and for creating such a sacred place of healing in the nation's capital. Maya's architectural projects, largely undertaken at the request of nonprofit institutions, include the newly renovated Nielsen Library at Smith College, and we'll see a little bit, or learn a little bit about that today, the Novartis Institutes for Biomedical Research, the Cambridge campus in Massachusetts, the Museum for Chinese in America in New York City, and the Riggio Lynch Interfaith Chapel. Importantly, and very interestingly to me, and I hope you have time to talk about this, in 2009, Maya Lin started work on what she may consider to be her last memorial, the title of which is What is Missing? This is an ongoing, multi-sited, multimedia installation that raises awareness about habitat loss and biodiversity loss, emphasizing how protecting and restoring habitats can help protect species and significantly reduce climate change emissions. So all concepts, ideas that are very much in keeping with the world that we wish to see. Maya Lin attended Yale University, where she earned a BA in 1981 and a Master of Architecture degree in 1986. She lives and works in New York City. And so I'm so pleased to hand over to Maya, who will now present on aspects of her creative practice with a series of slides. And she will begin with her current commission for the Obama Presidential Center. And then hopefully, as mentioned, we'll have a little bit of time for questions and conversation. So over to you, Maya, with many thanks.
Thank you, Louise, for that wonderful introduction, and hello to everyone. And yes, you are seeing an image, a rendering of the artwork for the Presidential Library, which I am so honored to be a part of. And it's called Seeing Through the Universe. And I think in my conversations at the start of the project, knowing how the president loved water, and I could not resist, and I couldn't not stop thinking about how, how many presidents and their first ladies go on a date. I thought that was so wonderful. So I kept thinking of creating something that would be a matched pair, a dance of sorts that would create two objects, two separate, equal yet different sculptures, both water fountains. One, the oculus, which is vertical, which you could look through a ring of mist. And the second, the table. Sometimes I refer to it as the lozenge. It's a low, pillowy form with water bubbling out and pouring over the entire surface. So how do I start? I think it started with a simple sketch, something like this, and that must have been a couple of years ago, and just experimenting, and also understanding that I wanted something that would be both magical yet also playful, so that a child can come right up to it and play in the water on the water table, or look through and almost jump through the oculus, the mist fountain. As we go into it, the original plaza that I think the president had wanted was over here, but it also happened to be right over the archives. And as we all know, the librarians' archives were not putting water above the archives. So then there was a car rotary. You can sort of see a convex shape here. And I started working in that area. And as opposed to being just a drop off, which I then discovered would be used very seldomly, I kind of took over the idea of a car drop off and made it a new plaza, which I am so proud that it's named for Ann Dunham, as Ann Dunham's Water Garden. And so this is sort of how it began, a little thought idea where we create an outdoor amphitheater. It's a bit of a sanctuary. It's a quiet space that then is activated by the users. And that's sort of, again, the scale of the relationship of the two sculptures to each other and to people. And the original idea for the plaza, and of course, Michael van Valkenburg, the landscape architect, working so that we really create a grove, a quiet little retreat that welcomes you in, gives you shade, basically takes what would have been given to the car and gives it back to the people. In my architectural work, I'm very much a believer in adaptive reuse. And for this one, it was about, hey, let's rethink what would have been given over to the car and give it to the people. And yes, the car can drive around there, but it will never feel that way. And this again is the approach. And I always envision, whether you're coming from the library and going to the lake or coming from the lake, that it forms this very welcoming, quiet retreat that you can gather in, hang out in, both something very active and welcoming throughout. And there is a precedent in my work. They're called the water tables. This one is for Princeton University, and it was called Einstein's Table, and the waterfront kind of is almost like a black hole. Or the Civil Rights Memorial in Montgomery, Alabama, which I made in '89. Or the Women's Table at Yale, which traces the emergence of women enrolled at Yale from when there were none. But as Louise mentioned, I balance my time between my art and my architecture, and had recently completed the rethinking of the Nielsen Library for Smith, where we had basically taken away all these, what you can see on the left in the before picture. They had basically taken an Olmsted campus and built addition after addition and created a wall. And I was able to create two much smaller additions and to the historic old building, giving the campus back to Olmsted, back to the students, creating outdoor green spaces and building ourselves over the foundation. And that's what it looks like today, when before the walls pretty much truncated the campus. And they're called the jewel boxes. There are two of them. And also rethinking the entire historic core to allow maximize daylight throughout and a sense of connectivity to the campus without. I'm currently working on a performing arts teaching space for Bard, downhill from Frank Gehry's wonderful Fisher Center. And so again, how do I do something? I kind of disappear into the meadow. So from Frank's building, I literally quietly tuck myself in. And that's what I look like, an outdoor amphitheater, a grassy amphitheater. And then from the downside, you reveal yourself to be 30-foot tall window walls facing the forest. But my work has also been balanced with sculptures that, again, many times incorporate water. This is Storm King Wavefield up at Storm King the art collection up there. And it's a 4-acre earthwork that takes its form from the repetition of a water wave. Or this is something that was done for the Renwick Gallery in DC, where I took an image of the Chesapeake Bay, and out of marbles, industrial marbles, I just drew a drawing of the Chesapeake that sort of defies gravity and allows water to flow uphill and on the ceiling. And then just recently, at the time I was completing the library for Smith, I installed a piece that was focused on the ravages of climate change. It was called Ghost Forest. It was installed in the middle of Manhattan at Madison Square Park. and it involved bringing 50 Atlantic cedars that had been victims of salt inundation caused by climate change. And over the course of one whole year's seasons, from when there were no leaves on the trees to the fall when we took it out, they bared witness as the park flowered out and leafed out, and they stayed still and in a way aging and decaying. So that piece was called Ghost Forest. And as Louise said, I'm always trying to emphasize whether we're reutilizing and rethinking what the car turnaround could be for the Presidential Library, or kind of shrinking the footprint of the Smith Library, or bringing awareness to climate change. I'm forever committed to issues concerning the environment. So a lot of what I believe in is inviting nature in, densifying cities and sustainable adaptive reuse, increasing parks and trees, and planning for resilience. And I'm just going to end with the two memorials. My first, the Vietnam Memorial, which in a way was never an object inserted into the ground, but I love geology. I collected geodes as a child. Imagine cutting the earth and polishing it, and letting the earth itself be the form, and then allowing the names to be the object, and you see yourself reflected. That, I always call these not so much monuments, but anti-monuments. My memorials and my work tends to be very intimate and really asking and engaging you on a one-on-one dialogue with the form. And from my first memorial, as Louise mentioned, I have been working and will give to this for the rest of my life. It's what I call my fifth and last memorial. It's called What is Missing, and it exists in as many places as it's invited in. So as a website, as temporary shows, as permanent installations. And if you go to whatismissing.com, it asks one thing of you: share a memory, something you've personally witnessed, or something your parents or your grandparents have told you about what's missing from the natural world or what's come back. It is a collection of stories, but as well, two paths forward. We talk about solutions, and I firmly believe at times art, or science fiction at times, gives us images of what we could do. And I think we're very determined once we can imagine it. And sometimes it just takes a roadmap to show us, well, this is what the world could look like. And so it's called Mapping the Future. And we're kind of hard at work on reiterating and visualizing that. So with that, I'm just going to stop my share. And I think Louise and I are going to have a conversation.
Thank you so much, Maya. Yes, so we will talk a little bit more about the pieces that you shared here, and then we'll shift into questions from the audience. I'd love to go back to the top, which is beginning with the idea of a commission for the Obama Presidential Center. The space is obviously site specific. We're building on a parcel of historic Jackson Park, again, a Frederick Law Olmsted project. Beneath that is the history of the Columbian Exposition. We're connected to community. So we think about the neighborhoods around us. We're connecting to the lagoon and to the lake beyond, but we're also telling a national story that has a global reach. And so I just wondered how you begin working on a commission such as this one, really thinking about that site-specific nature, and how the ideas begin to percolate and kind of play out over time. So if you could walk us through that process.
Right. I think there were twofold things. One, I'm very contextual, and the contextuality isn't just the physical site. It's what's going on within the center. And for me, being about, in a way, talking about President Obama and the First Lady, Michelle, I really wanted to make a bit of a portrait. I mean, in an abstracted way. I felt I wanted to create something that was, in a way, about who they are as a couple. And there's just, I mean, to me, again, I could not stop smiling when when the president was taking Michelle out on a date. So I feel like there's a bit of that where I wanted to create a dance through the sculpture. That being said, he definitely loves water, and being able to create something that was a fountain, again, posed problems at the start because of where there was one other plaza. But I do feel that's where it all started. I think for me, and I love Todd and Billy's work, just being able to, and I've worked with Michael van Valkenburg, the landscape architect, being able to create a piece that then, in a way, was customized and shaped around a place. But also, I think with art, sometimes it's not just a one-way street where you're given a site. I think maybe it's my training in architecture as well. I was able to say, look, if we just turn this one wall from being convex to concave, we can actually shape a brand new public plaza and give it back to people. So I think for me, it was about always knowing this piece had to become a place to gather. I've always thought of it as a bit of a sanctuary. My water tables tend to be very calm, quiet. You almost have to walk up to them to hear them and to see them. So there's always that idea that you need to talk to it or create a one-on-one dialogue with it, which again, automatically begins to get you to think in a much more, I want to say, quiet, reflective way. No matter how public the space is, there's just almost a natural psychological response to kind of quiet down, because you almost have to listen for the water. You'll have to listen for the mist. And I think I can just see children and adults kind of putting their hands through the mist ring and seeing through it, which again, to me, it's all about how forward thinking President Obama is and was then. He's just brilliant. He's a brilliant mind together. And I just wanted to talk about that a little bit. So the whole piece, and even the choice of the stone, has almost like a galaxy celestial quality to it. So it's all about extending yourself and looking farther and farther into the future, into where we're headed as a country, which I think he's very deeply committed to understanding. And literally, it's about looking, and it's about kind of creating a welcoming space for people to kind of, think.
That's wonderful. Thank you. And I think it speaks to the balance that we're also trying to craft within the space. So we're building a cultural institution. It houses a museum, which is kind of the anchor of the experience in terms of storytelling. But then we think about the museum as it's connected to a center, which is part of a complex, which is a campus, but simultaneously a civic commons. We don't want to think about campus as a kind of encampment. We want to think about this openness, which we also see reflected through the actual forms of your sculptural piece, and that relationship between contemplation, a contemplative space, and a playful space. So again, speaking to audiences, visitors, participants of all ages. And it is, I think, the balance of activity. This is intended to be an action-oriented place where people get to do lots of different things, but also within green space and thinking about wellness as a space to slow down and a space to think and to enjoy the benefits of being in green space. So I just love the way in which your commission is embracing all of those elements simultaneously. And as a menu of options, people can take what they need in any given moment of visiting the site. One of the things that you raised for me was certainly the intimate relationship that one can have with your work, that you can get up close, you can touch, you can feel the elements, you can connect to the materiality. But you also work at an immense scale, including referencing the universe, referencing the cosmos, the galaxy. And so I'd love to learn a little bit more about how you think about scale as a practitioner, as an artist, as an architect. What does scale mean to you?
Scale means that no matter how large, I mean, I love the idea that I would say no matter how large and no matter how public my buildings and my spaces are, in the end, they're intimate. And I think scale is something that I'm going to invite you in, always make it so that you feel exceedingly welcomed and invited in. And it actually takes your participation within it, touching the water, playing through it to activate the piece. So now you're, in a way, psychologically, you become part of the piece or part of it. It's not something where, and again, scale is a funny thing. But I do believe that the unique thing with what I do is it will always feel intimate, no matter how big it is. In the end, by the time you walk up to it, you've now become, you're a bit in control of it. You can kind of guide your way through it. You can touch the water, it'll change it, because the water tends to be very, very still. Even though it's moving, you can barely tell it's moving, and then you play with it and you activate it. So I think from a point of view, it will always, my works tend to be, as you approach them, you become, they're very human in scale. And the water tables, they're tables. And so I don't know if you've, the whole trick about bringing a Christmas tree indoors. You think you've got this kind of normal sized tree, and then you bring it indoors and it's way too big and you have to lop off a foot of the trunk. It's like, this happened to me as a kid all the time. And think about it in reverse. To make a table out of doors, which in a way, the round horizontal pieces, it is a table, you make it larger, and I can't remember, it's like 10, 11 feet, but it will feel intimate like a dining room table inside. And what I love about these circular forms are, as more and more strangers walk around it, they begin to complete the circle, and you actually become part of a communing with people you don't know. And it just adds to this sense of almost a psychological intimacy, that you're actually at a table. We all know what a dining table is, and as far as like we've all eaten in a round table, that there's something very, very democratic about it. There is no hierarchy, there's no head. And I think that will welcome you in. In fact, the whole circle and the whole elliptical shape of the plaza itself kind of protects you. There's trees on both sides, and then there's the opening for the sculptures. And then you're surrounded again by this seated outdoor amphitheater. So I think as more people come in and sit down, and those are very much tree covered as well, you're going to really feel like you're part of a community.
That's wonderful, Maya. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's wonderful, the connection, as we hear from Michelle Obama a lot about the kitchen table and what that means in terms of a sense of kinship, of gathering people, friends, and that friend circle may grow over time. But I love the idea of performativity within the space, that strangers will come together, will convene, will commune and have an experience that they will then take with them. So that ephemeral nature that actually becomes a lasting point of reference. And we'll come back in a moment, I hope, to the broader conversation around memory, which is so embedded in your work. But I also wanted to ask you a little bit more about materiality. You've mentioned, obviously, the elemental nature of your work. It is connected to nature. It connects to water, to the environment more broadly. But if you could say something about the materials that you like to engage and the materials of this particular piece, and what that means to you as an artist and as an architect.
I always use natural materials. I've only once ventured away from that, and it's always, so it's it's water, it's stone, it's wood, it's metal, sometimes it's glass, but it's always things that you really feel connected to. This stone is from Virginia, and it's definitely a very special kind of gray, not too dark, but also not too light, with an incredible quartzite constellation series. And we actually went down to the quarries and found a ledge or two, because you never know until they start cutting into it, that has almost a constellation. It's almost like the galaxy unfolding. And certain granites have that. Most granites we're very familiar with are much more of what I call the salt and pepper. It's bigger quartzite flakes that are more even. There's only a few that really have almost that constellation type effect. So it was a stone that we really fell in love with. And other than that, my use of water, I have always been drawn to water. Maybe it's because water is one of those intensely powerful elements, yet it can be so quiet and so calm. So I think what you have with water is a sense of a hidden strength. And when you choke it down and you let it be something, whether it's a mist, which is a cloud, or whether a quiet sheeting of water, that's a very different sensibility of nature, and what nature, how beautiful it can be, how powerful, but it's a quiet beauty, if you know what I mean, than a geyser. And I don't think my work tends to be focused on the geysers in the world, but so those are how I work. And then of course with the plaza, the greens, the trees, the native plants surrounding it become very much a part of making this place a real garden.
And could you say a little bit more, Maya, about your work actually in landscape? I know that this is obviously connected to landscape and to the work of landscaping that Michael van Valkenburg and his team are doing. But you're also known for your kind of earthwork-based pieces, and would love to hear you kind of reflect on those.
Well, I think, I was born and raised in southeastern Ohio, and it is an area of the country where the sort of prehistoric 1100 AD Hopewell and Adena tribes existed, and they left these mysterious effigy mounds. One was in the shape of the serpent. You'd go like on the way to the Athens High School, there was like this big odd, just one hill. And you grew up with these, and you grew up knowing that these, 1,000-year forms were still very much a part of the landscape. And I don't know, my very first artwork that dealt with an earthwork was for Sweden, and it was a 11-minute line. It was a drawing made out of earth, and part of it was because when early European settlers first came to America, they found some of these effigy mounds. And I had read that they said, well, certainly the people here could never have done that. Someone from Europe must have come over and made these shapes. And I thought, what incredible hubris. So I figured I'd bring a little bit of southeastern Ohio to Europe just to do. So that started me thinking about how could I use and sculpt the earth itself to begin to create works that when I was done, it was almost like, and as people ask, like, well, how will this piece wear? Like, what will it look like? Aren't you worried it's going to soften? I said, no, I'm waiting for that, because you in a way want these pieces to become a little bit ambiguous with, did someone make this, or is it the earth itself beginning to shape it? And that interface where at times you are very much integrated into the landscape. And I could take that back to the very first one, which was the Vietnam. I didn't want to create something that overpowered what was a very beautiful park, Constitution Gardens. I wanted to create a work that would tuck itself away, still be a powerful statement, but never in a way create that conquest of the land. And I think that has been my mentality and approach to working with the land from the very beginning, because I think when I was a kid growing up, I was extremely concerned as a child about how man was hurting the environment, because I grew up again in the 60s and 70s. The Clean Air Act happened, the Clean Water Act happened, the Endangered Species Act happened, Lake Erie caught fire. The ravages of DDT, known from Rachel Carson's book, was really playing out. And if it weren't for better legislation that begins to see the cause and effect, how nature is being beaten down, but if we protect it, it comes back. That was incredibly formative for me. And I've sort of tried in my art and in my architecture to have a very sensitive approach to working with the land.
I also wondered about, in terms of works of yours that we're familiar with that live outdoors, that live in nature, I also wonder about your work with built space in interior spaces. For example, the Nielsen Library at Smith College, and thinking about what it means to create space that will be used in a very functional way, but is also attached to what libraries mean to us, to the idea of knowledge production and circulation, to the idea of, again, contemplation and reflection. I was just struck by the beautiful quality of light in that space. It's not the dark, musty library that we sometimes think of when we think of university or college libraries. So I'd love to hear about your working in interior spaces that have a particular sensibility.
Well, I mean, I think what I grew up sort of very inspired by sort of the 50s modernists. I think I also grew up with a father who was a ceramicist too, which is why I play with clay to this day to make the earthworks. But as well, he threw the pots that we ate off of. He made the furniture we lived with and I still live with today. And it was a very clean modernism, but it was a modernism that comes out of the warmth of the 50s, whether you're talking about Charles and Ray Eames or Arne Jacobsen or Saarinen. These are like the early modernists before you get into kind of a much more mathematical minimalism. These were designers who really connected to wood and nature and picture windows that frame views to the natural world. I think throughout my choice of maximizing daylight, creating spaces that are so warm, and in a way people have said my interiors, my architectural work tends to be very human, very humane in a way. I think, when I was working for Novartis, they had called me in partly because the lead of the research facility said scientists don't talk to one another outside of their silos. You will be able to get them to come into the communal gathering spaces and talk to one another and have these unplanned moments. So maybe it's because I'm a faculty brat and I grew up on a campus. I think all my buildings are very much in the spirit of a college campus, that what we're doing is we are creating spaces that people will inhabit, and you want them to always be about learning, community, gathering, and coming together and wanting to hang out. The fun thing about a library today is it's sort of like not just the quiet carols, individual studying. Libraries today also mean a lot more socialized study spaces. So we were able to create spaces for one or two people to quietly tuck away in, still very connected to the outside daylight, but also places that are incredibly social, which is the bigger change in libraries, as well as the connection to the internet. I mean, one of the reasons we were able to shrink the building footprint and yet do exactly what they wanted functionally is that Smith is part of that 5-campus compound where they share a library hub of an interlibrary loan. So if you want a building that's not there, then it will be there in 24 hours. And that mentality that we can create spaces where we're not just a vault, a musty vault of books, yet they did a total in-depth survey knowing which books were always in circulation, which books hadn't been touched for the last decade, and they were able to determine, and I think we are kind of rethinking what a library can be in the 21st century, and that was really exciting to be part of that conversation.
That's wonderful. And we're having the same conversations with our partners at the Chicago Public Library as we think about building again a new kind of library for this particular center, but knowing obviously the rich civic infrastructure work that public libraries do in tandem with research libraries. And obviously we live in a city that has a rich academic environment as well. So yes, certainly thinking about space in relationship to how people convene and learn in different ways. In terms of time, I'd love to turn quickly to the idea of memory and the memory work that you are doing currently through What is Missing, which is obviously a digital project, but speaking back to the art and architecture that lives physically in the world. I'm also interested in the relationship between that project and something like Ghost Forest. Again, activating a space through nature while simultaneously mapping and being mindful of the very idea of degradation or evolution over time in terms of that organic matter. And so I'd love to hear about how you came to that particular project, to Ghost Forest, and then what your hopes are for What is Missing, and how you imagine that being archived in some way in the future.
Thank you. I think for me, Missing starts out maybe 30 years ago, where I knew, and I have been drawn to, whether it's the Vietnam War, civil rights, women's rights, Native American rights, the Confluence Project, multi-sited out west, people had called me in, and I knew that I wanted, because I care so deeply about the environment, I knew, because as an artist, I work in series, that my 5th and final memorial would be one I would call into being. So I started doing research on extinction of species, and I had a commission to do an artwork for the California Academy of Sciences. And by then it was, I had started an idea of it in 1999 with my book, Boundaries. I wrote about something I called the Extinction Project. Didn't know what it was, but I tend to write about an idea. I just felt, what could I do as an artist who happens to have been connected to memorials to make people aware of the 6th extinction of species we're in? And as I started talking to scientists with the California Academy of Sciences, I ended up giving them an artwork that dealt with the topographic wire landscape of San Francisco Bay above and below sea level. But I gave them a second piece. And the second piece was a permanent installation of, I don't know if you remember RCA Victor, our master's voice, a big kind of ear funnel. I made this enormous sculpture that kids can jump into. And then we had donations from Cornell Ornithology Labs, National Geographic, the BBC, and we produced 75 almost 1 to 2 minute haikus that talk about what is endangered, what we're losing. They're videos that you listen to, but I always knew, with climate change and where we are, I did not want to go forward with something that just makes you aware of loss, that we have so little time left. So I needed to create a piece that would be like all my other memorials about time, but could we look at the planet past, present, and future? could we use an idea of loss to make you feel how beautiful and sacred nature is, to make you to care enough in order to enact change, in order to engage, and then to give you through the website action items, not just individual, what we could all do as, in a way, consumers, but also this thing called mapping the future, which is all about what if I could imagine different scenarios, right? And so that's how it all gets started, but it starts with an idea of deep timelines of cities, rivers, species. So like, we do not understand what might have come 150 years ago. You might not realize that when the Europeans were coming over, they were chasing cod. Cod in 1890s was bigger than a man. What do we know of cod? This big. Or that a lobster was, by according to this one explorer, Adrian van der Duck, 6 feet long. So what have we done? We've collected these historical accounts. There's almost, I think 250, 500 timelines of cities, rivers, countries, species, and they give you an idea of what used to be. And many times, especially with rivers like the Thames, I think Parliament shuts down because of the big stink. The Thames hasn't been as clean as it is today in over 400 years. So nature, though beaten down, if we protect it, it's resilient, it comes back. So for me, the emphasis always been about how much protection restores nature. And of course, linking it to climate change, 50% of all species at a risk because of habitat loss and degradation, and 50% of emissions is caused by habitat loss and degradation. So we focus on nature-based solutions, reforming land use practices and protecting our oceans, our wetlands, our forests, our grasslands, as a way to both absorb emissions from 50 to 150%, as well as to restore biodiversity. So to me, I have a phrase, we can save 2 birds with 1 tree. And I love to point out with a sense of humor, like according to the World Economic Forum, if it would take $1.6 trillion annually to mitigate climate change, well, we spend that on alcohol every year. So what can an artist do? Maybe I can get you to reframe the problem. And it's not like don't have that drink, but it's more like buy another drink for the planet, buy 2. We're spending the type of money it would take to save the planet and to save ourselves every day. We're having what I would say is the biggest party at our children's expense, at our children's expense. So Missing tries to engage and say, what can an artist do? I'm not trying to be a scientist, but I'm a recycler. I take a lot of content and a lot of information and I try to pose it in ways that you might not be thinking of juxtaposing to get you to put it in perspective. We could solve this, and nature-based solutions is a huge key.
That's amazing, Maya. We just have a few minutes left, so we'll turn to questions. And I know that we have one question that is up already, and this is coming to us from Amanda Lucidon. And I think many people on this call will know Amanda as an award-winning filmmaker, documentarian, public speaker, also someone who worked as a White House photographer very closely with Mrs. Obama. Amanda asks, how does Maya envision the space, her commission, being used by the community? And what does she hope to evoke or activate through this creative space? So maybe if we could just think a little bit more specifically about community.
Well, I think knowing that it creates these outdoor, I always say there's a bit of a classroom experience going on out. So you've got 3 different areas of seating, and each one you could be hosting a group to come in, and whether that's an informal group or something more formal, you've got a lot of school groups coming through there, as well as visitors coming in groups. So I think it gives you a place. Now, granted, you have the whole front of the entry plaza as well, where people will be greeting. This is just sort of a much more quieter space where you're surrounded by nature in a lot of ways. And for me, it's not about a planned space at all. It's like, this is something that is there to kind of give you a break and a moment where you're sitting in the shade. I know Chicago summers can be pretty hot, so the mist is actually going to drift on over at times and cool you off. There is a way in the winter where there's going to be a wind gauge, and at a certain point the water turns off. But basically, unplanned but extremely welcoming. This I see as a gateway in or a gateway out as you're leaving.
Thank you. Mike, I'm not sure if you'd like to jump back on, maybe with some closing comments, or if there's an additional question that may have popped up in the chat.
Yeah, I do not see any additional questions. I'll just take one point of personal privilege to say that my wife, who is a licensed architect, grew up in Athens, Ohio. Her name is Demona. So there's something there.
Yeah.
Her parents were administrators and faculty, so I was really thrilled to hear that.
It's
so
a small town.
Yeah, it's a small, exactly. There's something about it. It's like wants people to build something, so I'll ask her about it tonight. Anyway, thank you so much, Louise. Thank you so much, Maya, for what was I thought just a fascinating conversation as someone who has been a part of this for such a long time. I was riveted because I think, the Obama's inspiring people to bring their own magic to this movement is, really what this is all about, and hearing how you've been inspired and what you've been inspired by from something as simple as a date is beautiful and is a gift to all of us. So really just thank you for that. And Louise, you're special, and we know that you've been able to guide so much in the same way you've guided this conversation. To everyone else, I would say look, this is the alumni group, so I got work for you to do. You're all like, what should I do? I got stuff for you to do. One, I want you to give. I want you to be a part of this. I want your name on the list here to bring this into a reality. Two, I want to make sure that you follow us on social. And three, Natalie Bookie Baker and Ashley Evans and Chris Liddell Westfeld and others write these beautiful newsletters for you. So read them, circulate them, etc. And with that, I want to thank you, Maya. I want to thank you, Louise. I want to thank the full team, Claire, Ashley, Eric, everyone who helped make this a reality and put this together. And we will see everyone at the next Alumni Zoom. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you, Maya. Take care. Bye.